You never realize how much you take the simple act of standing up for granted until your legs simply refuse to do it. I can remember the exact sound the floorboards made in my bedroom when my knees hit the ground. It was a late Tuesday night, maybe 3 in the morning. The house was completely quiet. I was deep in sleep when my right calf seized up with a violence that took the breath right out of my lungs. It felt like somebody had taken a thick steel cable, wrapped it around the belly of my muscle, and hooked it to a winch. I threw the heavy blankets off and tried to force myself out of bed to walk it out, which is exactly what I had done my whole life when a cramp hit. But the second my bare foot touched the cold floor and I put my weight down, the muscle locked entirely. The leg gave out completely. I hit the floor hard enough to rattle the nightstand and wake Linda up in the next room. I sat there in the dark, clutching my lower leg with both hands, trying to massage a knot that felt like it had turned into solid concrete. The pain was blinding, the kind of pain that makes you grind your teeth to dust. But looking back on that night, it was not the sharp pain that really frightened me. It was the weakness that settled into that leg for the next 4 days. I was dragging my foot when I went out to the garage. I caught myself holding onto the railing with both hands just to get up the 3 steps from the driveway to the kitchen. I could not trust my own leg. I was in my late 60s at the time, and sitting there in the dark after that fall, a very quiet, very cold thought crept into my mind. I thought, this is how the decline actually begins. You lose the strength in your legs, your balance gets shaky, and slowly your independence slips right out the front door. I tried very hard to brush it off over the next few weeks. I told myself that everybody gets a Charlie horse now and then. I told myself it was just part of having a lot of miles on the odometer from 30 years of working on concrete floors in a distribution warehouse. I told myself to just tough it out. But the cramps kept coming back. Sometimes they hit the calf. Sometimes they curled my toes up in my foot. And every single time they happened, they left my legs feeling hollowed out, like the raw strength had been physically siphoned right out of my muscle fibers. My daughter Megan came over for coffee a few weeks later. She is an occupational therapist, and she has this habit of watching how people move when they think nobody is paying attention. She caught me rubbing the side of my thigh and shifting my weight awkwardly when I stood up from the armchair. I tried to play it down. I told her it was just a cramp, nothing a good night of rest would not fix. She put her coffee mug down on the table and gave me a look that meant business. She told me something that afternoon that I really did not want to hear, but that I desperately needed to understand. She explained that over 60% of people my age deal with severe nocturnal leg cramps, and almost all of them make the exact same mistake I was making. They ignore it. They think it is just a passing spasm. But she broke it down for me in terms I could not ignore. She said that when a muscle locks up that violently in the middle of the night, it is not just tightening. It is literally tearing microscopic fibers apart. The tension is so extreme that it damages the tissue. If that happens 3 or 4 times a week, your body cannot repair the damage fast enough. You are accelerating your own muscle loss every single night. You are getting progressively weaker while you sleep. That number stuck in my head like a nail. 60% of us just lying there in the dark, quietly losing our independence, accepting the pain, and thinking it is completely normal. I decided right sitting at that kitchen table that I was not going to be part of that statistic. I was not going to let my legs rot away from the inside out just because I was too stubborn to figure out what was broken. I spent the next 3 years trying to understand exactly why my legs were locking up and why the strength was draining out of them. It was a very long, very frustrating road. I made a lot of mistakes and went down a lot of dead ends. But eventually, after tearing apart my routine and paying close attention to how my body actually responded, I figured out 4 specific things that were causing the breakdown. 4 things that were draining the power from my lower half. The first 3 things were mistakes I was making every single day, thinking I was actually helping myself. And the 4th thing was the missing piece. It was a specific, very hard to find mineral compound that completely changed the way my muscle fibers recovered and held their strength. I am going to walk you through all four of these today. I need to be clear about something up front. That fourth item is the most critical piece of the puzzle. But if you do not understand and fix the first three mistakes, that rare mineral will not do you an ounce of good. Your body will just reject it. You have to understand the whole picture. The first thing I did when the cramps started getting bad was exactly what every working man my age does. I started eating bananas. I remember being a young supervisor on the loading dock back in the 1980s. In the middle of July, the warehouse would feel like an oven. Whenever one of the loaders got a cramp in his leg, the older guys would tell him to go eat a banana for the potassium. It was warehouse gospel. It was the only remedy we knew. So I started keeping a large bunch of bananas right on the kitchen counter. I made it a strict habit to eat one every single night, about an hour before I went to sleep. I figured I was outsmarting the problem. I was loading up on potassium, but the cramps did not stop. In fact, they started getting more frequent and they changed. Not only did my calf lock up, but I started getting these restless, twitching spasms in my thighs that would keep me awake, staring at the ceiling for hours. I could not understand what was going wrong. I was following the rules. It was not until much later that I came across a piece of reading that completely flipped my understanding of this old habit. The study looked at older adults who suffered from chronic muscle spasms and examined what happened when they consumed fruit late at night. It showed that the sugar spike from eating a ripe banana right before bed triggers an insulin response in the body. That insulin spike actually pushes the potassium into the cells in the completely wrong ratio, disrupting the delicate electrical balance your nerves need to stay calm. Furthermore, a banana only has a tiny fraction of the daily potassium a grown man actually requires, but it comes loaded with enough concentrated fructose to keep your nervous system quietly firing off signals. I was basically feeding the cramp. I was giving my nerves the exact fuel they needed to misfire. I had a neighbor down the street named Arthur, a good man who used to walk his dog 3 miles every morning, rain or shine. Arthur swore by his bananas. He ate 3 of them a day. One afternoon, I was pulling out of my driveway, and I saw Arthur struggling just to pull his empty garbage cans back to his garage. I rolled the window down to ask how he was doing. He leaned heavily on the plastic lid and told me his legs felt like they were made of solid lead, and he was waking up screaming in pain from Charlie horses almost every night. He was doing the exact same thing I was doing. We were both trying to treat a complex, age-related physical breakdown with a piece of sugary fruit, simply because that is what someone told us to do 40 years ago. When the bananas failed to bring me any relief, I moved on to the next logical solution that everyone suggests. Hydration? Every time I mentioned my nighttime leg cramps to anyone at the hardware store or after church, the immediate response was always the same. They told me I was dehydrated. They said my muscles were drying out and cramping up because I was not drinking enough water. I took that advice to heart. I started drinking water like it was a competitive sport. I bought one of those massive plastic jugs and kept it sitting right next to my chair in the living room. I was drinking glass after glass of plain tap water right up until the minute I turned the lights out to go to sleep. What happened next was entirely predictable, but I was too focused on the cramps to see it coming. I started waking up 3 or 4 times a night just to use the bathroom. My sleep architecture was completely shattered. I was walking around in a fog during the day. But the worst part was that the leg cramps did not stop. They actually felt sharper, more brittle. The muscle did not just seize, it felt like an old dry rubber band that was being pulled to its absolute snapping point. The lingering weakness the following day was even more pronounced. I felt like I could barely push the clutch pedal down on my old truck without my legs shaking. I eventually found an observation from a sports medicine clinic that tracked older athletes and their hydration habits. The findings were a hard truth to swallow. The observation showed that overhydrating with plain water, without binding that water to essential electrolytes, actually flushes the remaining crucial minerals right out of your system. They tracked a group of men in their late 60s and 70s and found that those who drank excessive plain water before bed increased their muscle spasm frequency by over 40%. I was literally drowning my internal system and washing away the very microscopic elements my muscles desperately needed to contract and relax normally. I was making myself weaker by the glass. I thought about an old buddy of mine from the warehouse days named Tom. Tom was absolutely terrified of getting kidney stones, so he carried a gallon jug of water everywhere he went. He drank constantly throughout his shift, but I clearly remember him having to sit down on empty wooden pallets in the middle of the afternoon because his legs would just give out from under him with sudden cramps. He honestly thought he just needed more water. What he actually needed were the minerals that the excess water was aggressively washing away. The third thing I tried almost cost me my mobility entirely, and it is the mistake that makes me the most angry looking back. I went to the local pharmacy, walked down the supplement aisle, and bought a massive bottle of calcium pills. My logic was simple and flawed. I figured my bones were getting older, my muscles were physically attached to my bones, so I must need more calcium to strengthen the whole structure. I took those big, chalky pills every single morning with my black coffee. For the first 2 or 3 weeks, I tricked myself into thinking it was helping. But then a completely different kind of heaviness set in. My legs did not just cramp violently at night anymore. They began to feel incredibly heavy and stiff during the day. Walking up the front steps to get the mail felt like I was wearing heavy winter work boots filled with wet sand. My balance started to get sloppy because I physically could not lift my feet quickly enough to clear the edge of the living room rug. I stumbled twice in 1 week. I mentioned this strange heaviness to my doctor during a routine checkup for my blood pressure. He asked me exactly what I was taking every day, and when I proudly told him about the heavy calcium supplementation, he just rubbed his forehead and shook his head. He explained the bodily mechanism to me in a way I have never forgotten. He said that calcium is the specific mineral that tells a muscle fiber to contract. It is the trigger that pulls the fiber tight. But to tell that exact same muscle fiber to relax and let go, you need a completely different mineral. If you flood an older body with high doses of calcium, and you do not have an adequate supply of the relaxing mineral to balance the equation, you are basically sending a constant, unending signal to your muscles to stay tight and rigid. You are locking the door and throwing away the key. He pulled up a medical paper on his computer showing that excess dietary calcium in older men often does not even make it into the bone matrix. Instead, it pools in the soft tissue and the vascular system, stiffening everything up from the inside out. I was literally turning my own leg muscles into stone because I was guessing at what my aging body needed. I drove home, walked straight into the kitchen, and threw that heavy plastic bottle in the trash can. So there I was, sitting in my armchair, feeling completely defeated. Eating bananas was making the electrical misfires worse. Drinking excessive water was flushing the good minerals out of my system. Taking calcium was turning my legs to lead. I was 71 years old at this point, chronically exhausted from lack of continuous sleep, and genuinely afraid that I was going to lose the physical ability to walk my dog around the block or get down on the floor to build blocks with my grandkids. I felt the window of my active life closing. But I am a stubborn man. I knew there had to be a mechanical answer. I knew the human body did not just self-destruct without a logical reason. That is when I finally uncovered the fourth piece of the puzzle, the thing I promised I would tell you about. It is the specific element that finally stopped the nightly agony and brought the raw, dependable strength back to my legs. Through a lot of reading and talking to people who understood human physiology far better than I did, I realized that the missing relaxing mineral, the counterpart to the calcium trigger, was magnesium. But here is the massive catch that kept me trapped in pain for so long. I had already tried taking magnesium pills from the grocery store years ago. They did absolutely nothing for my legs except severely upset my stomach. I had incorrectly assumed that magnesium just did not work for my body. The truth was far more complicated, and it took me a long time to dig it out of the noise. The cheap magnesium they sell in those big plastic bottles at the supermarket is almost always something called magnesium oxide. Your body absorbs maybe 4 or 5% of it. The rest just acts as a harsh laxative and passes right through you. It is essentially dead dirt. But what nobody at the pharmacy tells you is that there are highly specific forms of this mineral, rare forms that are bound to organic acids, that have the unique ability to cross the cellular barrier directly into your muscle tissue. The specific one that changed my life, the one that finally gave me my legs back, is a compound called magnesium malate. The malate portion of this compound comes from malic acid, which is a natural substance deeply involved in how your individual cells produce raw energy. When you bind elemental magnesium to malic acid, you get a highly absorbable compound that does two crucial things at the exact same time. First, it forces the locked muscle fibers to finally relax and let go, stopping the violent cramps dead in their tracks. Second, it delivers raw, usable energy directly to the mitochondria within your leg muscles, actively fighting off that heavy, hollow weakness that drags you down during the day. Finding it pure is not always easy. It is rare to find it without a bunch of cheap fillers thrown in. And what really shocked me, what really made me angry, was learning exactly why men my age are all so desperately deficient in it in the first place. I read a detailed agricultural report on soil depletion going back 50 years. The vegetables we eat today, the leafy greens that are supposed to be naturally packed with these essential trace minerals, are grown in completely dead dirt. Modern commercial farming methods have aggressively stripped the topsoil of the very trace minerals our muscles require to function. You can eat all the fresh spinach and kale in the world, but if the mineral was not physically in the dirt when the seed was planted, it is not in the plant when you eat it. And if it is not in the plant, it never makes it to your legs. We are all walking around, working hard, getting older, and slowly starving for a specific trace element that used to just be naturally present in our well water and our garden soil. When I finally got my hands on a high-quality, clean form of magnesium malate, I did not expect a sudden miracle. I have lived long enough to know that nothing worthwhile happens overnight. I expected a very slight improvement over a period of months, but the physical shift in my body was profound. I remember the third night after I changed my routine and introduced the mineral. I woke up at my usual time, right around 3 in the morning, instinctively expecting the familiar, terrifying tightening in my calf. I lay there in the dark, barely breathing, just waiting for the spike of pain to hit. It never came. My legs felt incredibly quiet. They felt heavy, but in a good, restful way, completely relaxed into the mattress. I closed my eyes and slept straight through until the sun came up. Over the next month, the changes began to compound rapidly. The daytime heaviness, that feeling of dragging wet sand, began to lift completely. I remember walking out to the garage to grab a wrench and suddenly realizing I was not looking down at my feet to make sure they cleared the threshold of the door. The confidence was returning because the muscles were finally repairing themselves at night, instead of violently tearing themselves apart in spasms. I ended up telling my son Derek about what I found. Derek is 41. He owns his own HVAC business, and he spends his entire day crouching in tight, uncomfortable spaces in people's attics. Derek is a proud guy, stubborn as a mule. He told me his legs cramped at night just because he worked hard, and that was just the physical price of doing manual labor. He thought it was a badge of honor. I did not argue with him. I just handed him the information and a bottle of what I was taking. A few weeks later, my phone rang. It was Derek. He did not say much, he never does. He just quietly told me that for the first time in years, he finally slept through the entire night without waking up in a sweat, and he noticed he did not have to use his arms to aggressively push himself up from a crouching position on the job site anymore. That is exactly when you know something is profoundly real. When a stubborn, hard-working man who does not want help finally admits that it worked. I am not sitting here telling you all of this because I think I have all the answers to aging. I certainly do not. I'm telling you this because I know exactly how terrifying and lonely it feels to lie in the dark and feel your own body seemingly turning against you. I know what it feels like to wake up in the morning and quietly wonder if your own legs are going to be strong enough to hold you up through the day. The physical decline that takes us out of the game is not always a sudden, dramatic event. More often than not, it is just a slow, quiet drain of your strength, cleverly disguised as an unavoidable nighttime annoyance. You do not have to just accept it. You do not have to accept the weakness as a mandatory part of getting older. Start looking very closely at what you are putting into your body. Question the old habits that you have carried around for decades. Look past the cheap, useless bottles sitting on the bottom shelf at the local pharmacy. Your muscles desperately want to work for you. They want to hold you up. They want to be strong. You just have to stop drowning them in excess water, stop feeding them empty sugar right before bed, stop turning them to stone with calcium, and finally give them the exact raw materials they are desperately looking for to repair themselves. I am going to keep figuring these things out, testing them on myself, and sharing exactly what I learn along the way right here from my home. Because the way I have come to see it, if we do not watch out for each other and share the hard truths as we get older, nobody else is going to step up and do it for us. I will be around. Take care of your legs, give them what they actually need, and they will take care of you.